He called me senile and brought the conservatorship papers. Richard's voice, my younger brother, echoed in the living room, cutting through the heavy silence of that summer afternoon in Marblehead, Massachusetts. The August sun, which usually flooded my Victorian mansion with a warm, golden light, seemed to have refused to enter, leaving the ambiance in a gloom that mirrored the darkness in my heart. I, Eleanor Vance, in my early 70s, a woman who had built a life of independence and respectability, was being reduced to a pathetic caricature in front of my own brother. He held a stack of documents, the navy blue cover with the state's seal, a cold, bureaucratic symbol of his intention to erase me. His eyes, once filled with a fraternal affection I naively believed to be genuine, now gleamed with a greed that turned my stomach. He wanted my fortune, my investments, the house that my late husband Arthur and I had turned into a home. He wanted everything I had painstakingly acquired and preserved. The pain of betrayal was a cold dagger in my chest, but beneath it, a flame of determination began to burn. Richard continued, his voice unctuous, yet with a tone of authority he never truly possessed. Eleanor, dear, it's for your own good. You've been so forgetful lately. Those memory lapses, the unpaid bills. The doctor agreed it's for the best. Lies. Pure and simple lies. I knew he had bribed Dr. Peterson, a man of questionable character Richard knew from his golf circles. Indignation choked me, but I forced myself to remain calm, to observe, to plan. My brother, the same one I helped pay for law school in Boston, the same one I comforted when his first marriage fell apart, was now plotting to lock me away in an institution, to steal my life. If you've ever felt the sting of betrayal and the fury of injustice, you know there are times when the only way out is to fight. If this story resonates with you, please like and subscribe to the channel to follow how this battle unfolds. My life was never one of ostentatious luxuries, but rather of comfortable financial security, built on Arthur's hard work and my own meticulous investment decisions over the decades. Since Arthur passed 5 years ago, loneliness became a constant companion, but never senility. I kept my mind active with book clubs, gardening classes in the Salem community, and the careful management of my finances. Richard, on the other hand, was always the type of person who saw money as an end in itself, not as a means to a fulfilling life. He always lived beyond his means, and his business opportunities often proved disastrous. In recent years, his requests for loans became more frequent and more audacious. I always helped him, with the naive hope that he would find his way. But help turned into expectation, and expectation into demand. He began to question my expenses, to suggest that I simplify my life, which, in his language, meant selling the house, the investments, and moving to a smaller place where he could have total control. I remember a Thanksgiving dinner last year when he, with a forced smile, asked about my will. Eleanor, have you thought about how you'll arrange your affairs? It's important to have everything in order, you know, to avoid future complications. That comment sent shivers down my spine. I had dismissed it at the time, attributing his concern to a sense of fraternal responsibility. How foolish I was. Now, he stood there, with the conservatorship papers, irrefutable proof of his unbridled ambition and his complete lack of scruples. He didn't just want my money, he wanted my life. As Richard spoke about the benefits of a luxury nursing home in Nantucket, where I would receive specialized care and company, I watched him. His eyes darted away from mine, fixing on some point on the wall, a clear sign of his dishonesty. He expected an outburst of anger, tears, or perhaps silent resignation. But I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. A plan, however rudimentary, began to form in my mind, an idea born of pain and the need to protect what was mine, not just materially, but also my dignity and Arthur's memory. Richard, I said, my voice surprisingly calm, almost a whisper. He stopped talking, surprised by my tranquility. I understand your concern, my dear. Perhaps you're right. A flicker of triumph crossed his face, quickly disguised. But before I sign anything, there's something I need to show you. Something Arthur asked me to keep secret. But now, perhaps, it's time for you to see. He looked at me with curiosity. What would that be, Eleanor? I slowly rose, feeling the weight of years and the situation, but with a new energy coursing through my veins. It's something in the basement. A family secret, let's say. Come with me? Richard hesitated for a moment, greed battling a pang of distrust. But the promise of a family secret and the prospect of more assets to be discovered were stronger. He nodded, a smug smile beginning to form on his lips. He had no idea what awaited him in the depths of that old house. The basement of my house, built in 1890, was a labyrinth of shadows and memories. Wooden steps creaked under our feet with every step, echoing the tense silence that had settled between Richard and me. The smell of damp earth, mold, and old wood filled the air, a fragrance that, to me, was the perfume of my family's history, but which for Richard, I knew, was just an obstacle to be overcome in his pursuit of wealth. He descended ahead of me, impatient, lighting the way with his phone's flashlight, uncaring of the dark beauty of the place. "Eleanor, please be quick. I don't have all day to play treasure hunt." His voice, once unctuous, now carried thinly veiled irritation. I ignored him, allowing my eyes to adjust to the gloom, guiding him with a calm I didn't feel inside. "Patience, Richard. The important things in life rarely reveal themselves in a hurry." We passed dusty shelves laden with homemade jam jars, old Christmas boxes, and furniture Arthur and I had promised to restore someday. Each object was a fragment of a life Richard seemed so determined to erase. We reached a darker corner, behind a pile of firewood Arthur used to chop for the fireplace. "It's here," I said, pointing to a small, almost imperceptible wooden door built into the stone wall. Richard frowned. "What is this? I've never seen this door before." He tried to open it, but it was locked. Arthur was a man of secrets, Richard, and some of them were very well kept. I extended my hand, revealing a small bronze key I had kept hidden in my pocket. The gleam of the key in the basement's gloom seemed an invitation to a forgotten world. A world Richard was about to invade. With a soft click, the small door opened, revealing a narrow, dark niche where the air felt even denser and older. Richard turned on his phone's flashlight, and the beam of light revealed a small, dark wooden box, covered with a thin layer of dust. It wasn't an ornate box, but rather sturdy and functional, with metal clasps rusted by time. "What's in there, Eleanor?" "Another one of your sentimental treasures?" he asked with a tone of disdain, but his eyes gleamed with insatiable curiosity. He expected forgotten jewels or valuable documents. I knew he wasn't prepared for what he would actually find. "It's something Arthur asked me to keep, in case one day." "Well, in case it became necessary," I replied, my voice laden with a mystery I hoped he would interpret as the promise of a secret inheritance. Richard, without waiting for further explanation, reached out and pulled the box from the niche. The weight of the box surprised him. He opened it with a brusque movement, and the accumulated dust scattered in the air, making him cough. Inside, there was no gold or silver, but rather a brown leather-bound diary, visibly old with pages yellowed by time. Beside it, a set of letters and some old newspaper clippings, all equally aged. Richard picked up the diary, disappointment evident on his face. "A diary? That's it? You made me come down to this hole to show me an old diary?" He was about to toss it aside, but I stopped him. "Read it, Richard. Read the first page. Arthur wanted you to know the truth." The word truth seemed to catch his attention. With a sigh of impatience, he opened the diary, and the phone's light illuminated Arthur's elegant, firm handwriting. Richard began to read, mumbling the words softly as if reading an unimportant fairy tale. July 1972. "The heat in Boston is unbearable, but the fire in my heart is even greater." He rolled his eyes. "How dramatic, Eleanor. Your husband was an incurable romantic." I remained silent, watching him, waiting. Arthur's narrative continued, describing a young man in love, a summer of promises, and a secret he carried. At first, Richard seemed bored, but as he progressed through the first few pages, his expression began to change. The diary's tone, which initially seemed like a youthful love story, gradually transformed into something darker, more urgent. He stopped mumbling and began to read in silence, his eyes scanning the lines with increasing intensity. The phone's light trembled slightly in his hands. I could see the tension building in his shoulders, the line of his jaw tightening. He read about an accident, a guarded secret, a promise made under duress. Arthur's story, which I knew only in fragments and whispers, was unfolding before Richard in all its complexity and horror. Suddenly he let out a small sound, a gasp, and his eyes widened. Color began to drain from his face, replaced by a pale, sickly hue. "No, it can't be," he whispered, his voice almost inaudible. His eyes, once filled with greed, were now fixed on the yellowed pages, filled with growing terror. He was reading the truth, a truth Arthur had kept for decades, and which now, finally, was coming to light. What Arthur had written on those pages was something Richard could never have imagined, something that would make him question not only his ambition, but the very foundation of his existence. Richard was paralyzed, the diary trembling in his hands as the faint light from his phone's flashlight danced over the words Arthur had written in a handwriting that now seemed terrifyingly familiar. "No, it can't be," he repeated, his voice a mere thread of sound, almost inaudible in the oppressive silence of the basement. I watched him, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm, a melody of anticipation and triumph. He had reached the darkest part of Arthur's legacy, a secret that wasn't just about money, but about the very essence of who he thought he was. The diary, pages detailed with cold, methodical precision, the events of a distant summer, long before Richard was born. Arthur had been an idealistic young man, working on an innovative research project at a small tech company in Palo Alto, California. The company, led by a brilliant mentor, was on the verge of a discovery that would revolutionize the industry. But there was a rival, an ambitious and unscrupulous colleague, who saw others' success as an obstacle to his own. This colleague, the diary revealed, was Richard's father. Arthur described how Richard's father had sabotaged the project, stolen the research, and, in an act of desperation to cover his tracks, had framed Arthur for a financial crime he didn't commit. The diary contained copies of forged documents, incriminating emails, and even a signed deposition from a former employee who, tormented by guilt, had confessed the truth to Arthur years later. But the terror in Richard's eyes didn't just come from the revelation of his father's dishonesty. Arthur had gone further. He had detailed how, after being unjustly fired and having his reputation ruined, he, Arthur, had planned his own silent revenge. He had used his knowledge of finance and technology to systematically undermine Richard's father's businesses, buying shares in rival companies, leaking strategic information, and finally, orchestrating a series of disastrous investments that led to the bankruptcy of Richard's father's company. "He didn't lose everything by chance, Richard," I said, my voice breaking the silence. "He lost everything because Arthur, my Arthur, ensured he paid for every injustice he committed." The diary was not just a record of events. It was a manifesto of retribution, proof that justice at times is served in unexpected and relentless ways. Richard read the last line, which said, "May my legacy be a reminder that truth, however buried, always finds its way to light, and that justice, however delayed, always prevails." Richard's face was green, not just from shock, but from a terrifying understanding. The man he idolized, the father he believed to be an unlucky businessman, was in fact a criminal who had been brought down by a cold, calculated revenge. And most frightening of all, the fortune he so coveted was, in fact, the fruit of that very revenge. Richard let out a muffled cry, the diary falling from his hands and hitting the dusty floor with a dry thud. He staggered backward, tripping over a pile of old boxes, his eyes fixed on me with a mixture of horror and disbelief. You knew this all along?" he stammered, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You knew my father was a thief? And that Arthur ruined him?" I nodded slowly, my expression impassive. "Arthur told me everything, Richard. Not immediately, of course. He waited until I was ready to understand the complexity of the situation, the pain he carried. He made me promise that if anyone ever tried to take what was mine, what he had built for us, I would reveal the truth. And here we are." Panic began to consume Richard. He looked at the diary on the floor, then at the small wooden door, as if the secret it held could materialize and swallow him whole. But this is crazy. My father, He always said Arthur was jealous that he had stolen his idea. Richard's voice rose in pitch, bordering on hysteria. All lies, Richard, I said, my voice calm and firm, contrasting with his desperation. Your father was a master of manipulation. He rewrote history to protect himself, to maintain the facade of a respectable businessman. But Arthur kept the evidence, all of it. The newspaper clippings you saw in the box, they detail your father's company's bankruptcy, the investigation, the scandal he managed to cover up with bribes and threats. The letters? They're from former employees who testified against him but were silenced. Richard rushed to the box, rummaging through the documents with trembling hands. He picked up one of the clippings, his eyes scanning the old headlines, the black and white photos. The truth, cold and undeniable, was there, printed on yellowed paper. He wasn't just the son of a dishonest man. He was the heir to a lie, and the fortune he so desired was, in fact, the trophy of a meticulously executed revenge. You can't do this, he whispered, sweat beading on his forehead. You can't commit me. If this story gets out, my reputation, my businesses, everything will be ruined. I smiled, a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Ah, Richard, but I don't need to do anything. The truth is already out there, waiting to be discovered. And you, my dear, are the only one who can decide if it will come to light or not. The basement, once a place of memories and secrets, transformed into a stage for Richard's despair. He looked at me, his eyes wide, his mind racing to find a way out. What do you want, Eleanor? He asked, his voice now pleading. Money? I'll give you whatever you want. Just don't tell anyone. I crossed my arms, watching him with the same calm he had mistaken for senility. I don't want your money, Richard. I want my life back. I want my house, my dignity. And I want you to understand the true cost of your greed. Richard, realizing his attempt at bribery was futile, began to retreat, his eyes scanning the basement for an escape route. He knew that, if that story came out, his life, built on a foundation of lies and unrestrained ambition, would crumble. His career, his contacts, his image as a successful businessman, everything would be pulverized. The fear in his eyes was palpable, a terror that went beyond financial loss, striking at the very essence of his identity. He had come to trap me, to silence me. And now he was the one trapped not by chains, but by the truth. You won't commit me, Richard, I said, my voice echoing in the basement. You will sign these conservatorship papers, but not for me, for yourself. You will remove yourself from my life, from my home, and you will never again approach me or anything that belongs to me. And if I hear even a whisper about this story, if you try to harm me in any way, Arthur's diary with all its evidence will be delivered to the press and the authorities. And then, my dear, you will discover what it truly means to be senile, living with the shame and ruin your father tried so hard to hide. Richard, pale and trembling, nodded. He knew he was defeated. The greed that had led him to the basement now forced him into a humiliating retreat. He ran upstairs, the sound of his desperate footsteps echoing through the old house, leaving behind the open diary and the shadow of a secret that would haunt him forever. I heard him start his car and speed away, the sound of tires screeching on the asphalt, a sound of escape, not victory. I stood there, in the basement, the sunlight finally streaming through the small window, illuminating the diary on the floor. Justice, at times, is not a gavel striking in a courtroom, but a truth whispered at the right moment. And on that day, the truth had been my most powerful weapon. If you believe that justice always finds its way, even in the most improbable situations, leave your comment, like this video, and subscribe to the channel for more stories where good always prevails.